Guess what spurred on this video? I'm getting a tattoo at my big age of 28. It's a bookish tattoo, so naturally that got me thinking about how tattoos are used as plot devices in young adult literature. Right. But that's the thing, is so many of our young adult heroes have them. That's a lot of tattooed 16 to 18-year-olds. However, they do serve as very effective plot devices, so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And it's actually so interesting. When I started going write this script, I was like, I have no idea where we're going with this, and then I started to pick it apart, and actually so many of them are like paradoxes, I think is the word that I'm looking for. It's so interesting, and I think that's also why they work so well for character development, specifically at the young adult literature level. So let's do this. So the first grouping that we have of this is how tattoos function as a means of making someone part of a group while also having them stand apart. A very common theme in young adult literature is this idea of wanting to fit in while also wanting to stand out from your peers. I do think you find that in every age range of literature, but I mean, it's specifically one that pops up again and again. Within young adult, particularly with the chosen one trope, tattoos are a very physical way to emphasize that sort of pull that is between both of those ideas. Of course, we're going to be talking about Divergent. By the way, there's going to be some spoilers. They'll be pretty mild, but I will put the book up on screen if I'm about to spoil something. Keep an eye out for that. Tris uses her tattoos to clearly display to the audience her divergence while kind of undercover, because the Dauntless are really the only ones in their society who have tattoos. Generally speaking, in a sort of stereotyped way, tattoos are very much seen as like a symbol of rebellion. For a lot of people, that's something that I feel is kind of closely tied to the Dauntless faction. They're kind of supposed to be the rebels, the troublemakers, while also simultaneously being the police, which I think is such an interesting like dynamic that happens within the faction. And getting tattooed is, it's not forced, but a significant part of their initiation. It is very much a permanent way of saying that they're part of that faction and that they, you know, they don't plan on leaving, obviously, and that they're sort of committed to this process of becoming Dauntless. But the tattoos that she ends up getting go directly against the like ideal of faction before blood. She has both of her factions on her shoulders, quite literally carrying the weight of her divergence on her shoulders, because she is shouldering both of those ideals of selflessness and bravery. And she gets the 3 birds to symbolize her family members that she left behind, even though that directly contradicts what she's supposed to be doing, which is letting go of those familial ties in favor of the faction over blood mantra. And I think that's why for readers, they feel so significant in both of those scenes of her getting tattooed, because it's a very permanent way of her taking a step towards who she wants to be within the Dauntless faction, while also kind of continuing to tie her to her past. Like, even in the movie branding and stuff like that, those symbols sort of set her apart. The tattoos that the characters get are defining pieces of their identity, which is how they use them to stand out individually. However, like we said, Dauntless as a whole consists of a lot of tattooed individuals. And it's how Tris is able to kind of like confirm that her mom used to be Dauntless. There was like a tattoo behind her ear, which means that her mother got tattooed at 15 probably. Crazy stuff happening in that faction. And it's something that stands out on her mom that also simultaneously ties her to the Dauntless faction as like a one of us type of thing. It's also how she identifies For as being similar to her, because she sees the tattoos. He has all the factions on his back. Because similar to Tris, he values what the other factions believe, and so she's able to kind of like make that connection with him, especially the 2 largest tattoos being the faction of Dauntless and Abnegation. The way she has them on her shoulders. They are at the top of his back as if he's carrying them. And it's also, it kind of like ties into this idea that they do share the same dream for Dauntless itself and their society as a whole. Tris doesn't really necessarily talk that much about what she imagines Chicago being as a whole, even though I feel like it is kind of obvious from her character, which is one of the reasons I really like the book so much, is that we don't have to have Tris just monologue at us all the time for us to understand who she is. And scenes like this where it's such a simple thing that she and For have the same tattoos, but it so clearly marks out the fact that they share the same dream and vision. Speaking of shared dreams, I put this meme in my notes because I think it's so fun. But in young adult literature, tattoos are somehow, for whatever reason, a lot of the times they kind of like tie the characters' dreams together. That is another way of them identifying somebody who is in a similar group to them, is that they're like, how do you have this tattoo that so perfectly parallels who I am or their own tattoos and stuff like that. And in this case with Juliet, she has been dreaming about this specific bird that Adam has tattooed on his chest. We get way into the series before we fully understand the gravity of that situation, but that moment is how she also makes that same kind of connection that Triss and Four have, where it's like we share this similar dream, similar ideal, because in the Shatter Me universe, birds don't fly anymore. So the fact that both of them visualize birds flying kind of puts them in the same camp, value and beliefs wise. One of the best examples of tattoos being used as a way to identify other members of your similar group is in the Shadowhunter universe. Now, I understand runes and tattoos are different, but quite the same, and they look very similar. And the Shadowhunters are kind of like covered in them a little bit. In the first book, she's given runes, and we have this moment of, is she gonna live? Because as a person, if you get a rune tattooed on you with a stele, whatever they're called, and you are not a Shadowhunter, you will quite literally die on the spot, or become like a Forsaken. Or it's an immediate recognition of who you are as a Shadowhunter. Because some people can have the sight and not be a Shadowhunter, and so the rune is a very intense way of testing whether or not you are actually part of the Shadowhunter group. However, like we said, there's this sort of kind of push and pull of tattoos marking you as a group, and then also being used as part of the plot as a way to separate out our chosen one. So with Clary, she can create runes. That's not something anybody else in our Shadowhunter universe can do. It makes her special, her extra powerful, and kind of reconfirms her identity as an artist and a creator. Again, Fourth Wing. I know that this is technically no adult. Okay, I know. However, I will link it somewhere. Divergent and Fourth Wing are the same books, except Fourth Wing has dragons. I mean that as a compliment, don't get me wrong. However, once you get into the writer's quadrant, as soon as you are chosen by your dragon, which means that you are officially a writer, you've made it, provided you don't fall off your dragon mid-flight, the dragon sort of brands you, and I know that, again, that's also not necessarily like, the dragon's not sitting there and like poking them with a needle, but it functions as a tattoo. It looks the same. And she ends up having this like double dragon tattoo because she's chosen by both Tiernan and Darna. So this is again like an example of how the tattoos put the character into their group, and usually their new social group. Another way to symbolize their growing up, going into Dauntless, becoming a Shadowhunter, going into the Writer's Quadrant. It all is like very similar steps for these characters, but because she has like this double dragon tattoo, that still sets her apart from her peers. But she's not the only one set apart because, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I still don't fully understand how the relic tattoos work. But the best explanation that I could find on Reddit is that the Rebellion kids had these like relic stones so that when their parents got incinerated for being rebels, the stones activated or something and created these secondary wrapping tattoos on the Rebellion kids. It's meant to somehow protect them from Melgren. And so with the Rebellion kids, they sort of have their extra tattoo or marking is the way that they can kind of partially, it's not like they need to recognize one another, they know who the Rebellion kids are. However, it sort of marks them apart from the other riders in the Riders Quadrant. Like we see Mira kind of eyeing the kids who have them because she's sort of part of this group of kind of, I think, the first class to have Rebellion kids in it, or she was like the last year to not have any of them, something like that. And so for them, it's not only like a marking that puts them into a group, it kind of also in this society very much separates them from other people. A lot of people don't want to have anything to do with the Rebellion kids. They have extra rules and stuff like that in place. That's how tattoos function, as a way of finding your group but also setting yourself apart. They can also function as a symbol of freedom and or bondage, which is shown very well in the Sarah J. Maas series. As I was writing the script, I was like, there's a blueprint. Like, I feel like I could finally see it. And in Sarah's books, it seems like tattoos are used as a way to like symbolize being cursed and bonded to something that you don't want to be, like you're stuck with something, particularly with her male characters. It kind of helps show how our leading ladies help them out of those situations. Sarah J. Maas's guys are definitely not damsels in distress by any means, but in a lot of ways, our female leads save them. Hunt has this thorn halo tattoo on him, which is quite literally a symbol of his slavery, which Bryce then is able to free him from. Rowan in the Throne of Glass series, like he quite literally carries the weight of others on him. He has the story of how he lost his wife and child etched into his skin. It is so deeply upsetting. I still remember reading that scene and just like it hurts so bad to hear him talk about that. And you know that the way it's written and the way he put this tattoo on is not a means of closure by any means for him. It's a reminder daily of what he thinks is his own personal failure. Now, you could argue, I think correctly, that it's not his fault. Like, there's so much, we're not gonna get into that right now. But when he meets Aelin and like their story sort of unfolds, he ends up adding to the tattoo, and it sort of shifts the story of like, it's not just the grief and it's there and it's always on him and he can't ever get away from it. It's sort of woven into this redemption arc and how he was able to come out of a dark place, find love, being with Aelin and meeting her. Rhysand and the tattoos on his knees of like the mountains and stuff like that. It's his vow to bow to no one except to the crown. He's like bound to the throne. It's a weighty responsibility, and it kind of like evokes this image of him like being on his knees, like sort of being powerless and like having to give so much up for his position, which he did. Like we know his backstory and how horrifying it is. And he did that because of his position as High Lord. But then when he meets Feyre and gives her the position of High Lady, which is a new position, he's sort of making her a symbol of that throne, which not only lets him share that responsibility, he also kind of finds this sense of freedom of being with her. Meanwhile, our girls, it kind of works the same way. A lot of their tattoos are sort of in a bonding sense, but it is more, I think, symbols of freedom when it comes to their characters. Bryce's tattoos are magic. Her star tattoo sets her apart as Starborn, and then the tattoo that she got from Danica, well, not from Danica, but you know what I mean, literally turns her into the horn that lets her travel between worlds. It's like a clear sense of freedom to be able to move. And Aelin's is interesting because she also has a very like similar thing to Rowan, where she has the stories of other people, but I feel like for her, when she got those tattoos, it was more of a sense of closure, a sense of like letting go, more than how Rowan's was like a reminder of responsibility. Aelin's kind of trying to settle and come to terms with her past that she's been running from for so long. And the tattoos seem more like a sense of acceptance of those parts of her story, those parts of who she is, whereas Rowan's was meant to be a way to never forget like what had happened. And Feyre's is interesting because yes, the hand tattoo, it binds her to Rhys, but it was also a sense of freedom for her, because the only way she got out of that marriage with Tamlin was because she was accidentally talking down the bond through this tattoo thing. Like that bond that was, I guess, like etched into her hand or whatever it was that called Rhysand to her. It kept her from going into a situation where she would, I mean, basically have her hands tied. We know how Tamlin is. You know, we see binding tattoos a lot throughout young adult and new adult literature. I feel like the Death Eater tattoo is like kind of comes to mind immediately in Harry Potter. And then also, if you've read Apprentice to the Villain, which I highly recommend, our main character Evie Sage has a little like pinky tattoo that binds to a tattoo that the villain is wearing. A brief detour. I feel like this was like a smaller category from what I could remember of different characters, but tattoos used as a means of status in a lot of ways. When a character gets tattooed, it's sort of meant to show that they know who they are at that point. Like they've made a decision, and that decision is then like basically permanently inked, if that makes sense. And while yes, it's like a design, there is like a kind of undercurrent of the idea that as you learn and grow and get older, you're gonna be scarred and permanently marked by things. While also a very common theme in young adult literature is like being in control of yourself and your own body, and making that decision to get tattooed a lot of the times is a character sort of coming into their own. There's a sense of permanence there, even though they as a character are still changing. So it's like a nice little milestone for a lot of them. However, the only like kind of exception that I could think of was the Hunger Games and the Capital People, their tattoos, which are used almost purely for decoration and a status symbol. You don't really see anybody in the districts getting tattooed. Like it's more of a luxury item in the capital. I don't know if this is necessarily like a plot device, but I really like it in stories when tattoos are used as part of the magic system, which is Bryce with the Starborn power, and again like the Shadowhunters with the runes, and how those give them different abilities depending on which one you're putting on the body. For the mortal instruments, it's usually kind of a sense of protection, which we see obviously with like the speed and stealth runes and stuff like that. But I pictured it as a tattoo. Let me know what you think. But when Simon gets the Mark of Cain from Clary, it's like an angelic rune. It's meant to ensure his safety. And it kind of acts as part of the powers system, because anytime somebody is going to try and attack Simon, they'll receive the same back 7 times over. It's meant to kind of parallel the biblical Mark of Cain by making it a sort of physical manifestation. And I didn't even realize it until I was writing this script, is that I do the same thing in my stories. I read a lot of urban fantasies, which is real life, except there's also like magic in our normal regular world. I'll link the video if you want to watch it, but I'm currently working on a manuscript that I'm hoping to publish one day, and my main character is a tattoo apprentice, starts tattooing people. the tattoos fade. And as soon as they fade, whatever their deepest wish or desire is comes true as soon as the tattoo fades. And I didn't even realize it. I've done that in a lot of different stories that I've written. Not like that exact situation, but where some sort of tattoo or mark is meant to be part of the magic system. And then I didn't really know where to fit this. I guess it could kind of fit within the idea of like identity and stuff like that. But specifically, we have to talk about Aaron Warner because he has 2 tattoos. He has Ignite on his back, which stands for I grieve nothing, I take everything. And then he also has the Shakespeare tattoo, Hell is empty and all the devils are here. Both of these sort of reflect his own views of himself, which Warner is like a very self-assured, I don't know if that's the right way to say it. He knows who he is, or at least he understands the sort of sense of darkness within himself and pictures that as the largest part of his personality, which is something that Juliet helps him change. But again, there's that parallel of the character seeing themselves sort of in the other person, is because Warner really believes that he's a monster, kind of in the same way that Juliet believes that she's a monster, specifically in books 1 and 2. By the time we get to the 3rd book, Ignite Me, which obviously ties to that tattoo, which the idea of I grieve nothing, I take everything, Juliet is sort of coming into that mindset. She's spent so much time feeling horrible about having powers, and at this point she's kind of deciding what she wants and what she deserves for herself. She's not trying to hide herself. Side note, this is also a perfect example of the hidden tattoo microtrope, which we see all the time, even in adult literature. I'm reading Powerless by Elsie right now, and the tattoo reveal in that one is quite literally a love declaration. It is an image of the love interest, like talk about seeing yourself in someone else. It's also, specifically in young adult, it's also like a way to have like an intense physical attraction scene while keeping it young adult, because like it's not necessarily explicit for the character to ask to see a tattoo, but it's an effective way to get them partially undressed in a scene. When you get into adult literature, I feel like at least in the adult literature that I've read thus far, the meaning matters less, and it acts less as a plot device to have a character tattooed. But if they are tattooed, you know that that's the love interest. That is the way that they're used. I just read Deep End, and I feel like everyone's giving it such crap because he has such a like kind of cringy millennial tattoo. And then any biker, mafia, sports romance, the tattoos might have meaning, but it's not like change the world with magic meaning. Would love to hear your thoughts on this, like any tattooed characters that are standing out in your mind right now that I'm forgetting. I feel like when I sat down to kind of like put down my ideas on paper for this, because there was no way I was just gonna like spout this one out, I feel like I was kind of forgetting a lot of characters. Like the main ones that come to mind obviously for me are like Fourth Wing Shadowhunters, Divergent, like that grouping. But any other sort of ways that tattoos are used in stories, I would love to hear about it. I think it's like such an interesting way for us to incorporate things physically with the characters without having to explain tons and tons of backstory, or to be used as a very quick way to give us backstory. Like, I got this tattoo because insert here, and then we can kind of move forward without necessarily needing a flashback scene, which I think is really useful. However, like I said, I'm getting a bookish tattoo this weekend. I'm so excited. I'm getting a Mockingjay. It's not gonna be like, I'm not getting like the Hunger Games logo, but it will be a Mockingjay with little flowers. I'll put the results here. Hopefully I'm still alive and not thrashing around in pain. I love the Hunger Games, obviously. I've wanted a Mockingjay tattoo for a really long time, and specifically because like Hunger Games was what got me back into reading after a very, very long break. At some point, I want a Divergent tattoo because that's the book that got me back into writing. That book really has like meant so much to me. However, the tattoo that I want is on my ribs, and I hear that that is quite the spicy placement. Everything I've ever looked at about tattoo placement is like, oh, but the ribs though. So we'll get the Mockingjay first to make sure I'm not a chicken. Also, if you have any bookish tattoos, let me know. I see them a lot. Like I'm in a lot of like book Facebook groups, and people post their stuff there all the time, and it's so fun to see like what people get. And I know that a lot of people get script tattoos. Obviously, lines from books are going to be pretty popular. I've seen a ton of ACOTAR and Fourth Wing tattoos, obviously. So if you have any of those, let me know.